So welcome, Bonnie, and we're thrilled to have you. We're starting a course. The course now begins September 10th. It's going to be 4 Sundays in September. It's called the Convivial Life Conversations with Ivan Illichs and Friends, and it's part of our series, Tools for Conviviality. Me and Tom were having a conversation about this word convivial, which both of us like because we are huge fans of Ivan Illichs and been reading him for years. But I'm getting some feedback. This word conviviality. Maybe we should educate people and tell people what that means.
Yeah, I can go first. I mean, the thing about Ivan Illichs and what I think makes him great for this course is that nobody gets him, right? Because we project kind of our own wishes for nice convivial society. So we say convivial, and what happens in people's head? They think, a bunch of like old nun type people walking around feeding the poor and doing these kind of like actions that are sweet and for Ivan Illichs, that would seem to him to be very perverse, like this virtue signaling or being able to have these systems that feed the poor and these roles that people play and understand their roles and this and that. And so I think the word convivial that has taken on this sense of nicety, and that clashes with the world we live in, because it's like, can you imagine just how do you get from here to there? How do you be like a nice person? And the world is really very brutal in many ways. And so so I think that's part of what makes the term hard to sell in this kind of environment. But it by no means was that what he was peddling, like a sweet, nice, docile relationship to reality.
Yeah, when I think of that word related to him, I think of what he did and his various sort of informal institutions that he had all over the place, and there was always a bottle of wine there, and always a table. Those are like the two main elements, So you sit around a table and you have a bit of wine. So it's never a sterile, institutional, overly formal situation. At the same time, it's quite serious,
Yeah, and I think Ivan Illichs, he hosted many of those, and his job as a host was really to kind of be provocative, So like you can imagine getting a bunch of people sitting around a table and a kind of conversation that we're used to, and people talking about, well, the problem with humans is that we create complicated interventions, but we live in a complex world, and we have to have this systems approach. And if you said that, Illich would just light up and say, systems, this is the problem. We can't do systems thinking. People get swallowed up in systems thinking. You can't have an authentic relationship with the gaze of the other when you're thinking in terms of human systems. And so then people would like, okay, and then the conversation would go around and someone would start talking about, well, all the good things that are happening, like the religion without a religion and the religio. And he would light up and he would be all over that. Like, the religion without a religion is not a religion. If you want to pretend to have a religion, then you'll have a pretend religion. And then he would smack that down. And his point is that if you're serious, it's very, 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 very hard to be moral and religious and to change the world. And anytime this conversation, even though it's convivial, see, this is what he thinks about convivial conversation, is to show up in this serious way, because he believed and he trusted that relationality could hold that kind of intensity and not to shy away from it, So like, I mean, he showed up with the leaders of the church that way. He was like a pain in the ass for them. And everything, many of his relationships, even with David Cayley, you know, when his biographer, it took him a long, you know, David had to be friends with him for a long time, and he would always brush aside, oh, I don't want to do a book or this or that, you know. And so the depth of the relationship is not in the kind of surface form it takes. It's whether or not I can be in relationship with you when we agree, when we disagree, when I'm for you, when I'm against you, when you're ahead of me, when I'm ahead of you, you know, like he was interested in conviviality and relationship like that. Yes, around wine and a table, but not to release the tension, release the engagement, but to become engaged, to become, and this is what he would say the definition of intimacy is. And of course, this was his definition of the religious life, to be engaged and intimate with God and Jesus this way, right? This way, not like like a fuzzy-dovey, childish way. And so in the course, I mean, one of the reasons why I've got it set up so we have these, he has a provocation and then these other more modern authors. So we get this sense in the video presentations, the recorded presentations, I'm going to set it up like all these little conversations. And so then when we come to the live conversation, then we just talk amongst ourselves, having seeded the conversation with these provocations, you know? I'm just kind of animated here because I really think that I really want people to understand what it must have been like to be in his conviviality, his convivial circle. It was a growth challenge, I would say.
So yeah, so it means that it's not that much about a superficial feeling, but more like in a way of engaging with the world, being in the world, and to be properly aligned within the world. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and to trust. In a sense, he was quite impulsive, right? He had this school in Latin America, and then when the church got involved in the politics of liberation in Latin America, he left the school. You know, he was quite impulsive, but in a sense, to also trust that the impulses in the conversation are meaningful, are to be respected, are to be engaged with, you know. So in a sense, it's a hard thing because it depends what you mean by right relationship. If that means, oh, I always have to balance myself and make sure that give you equal time and this and that, if that is not in right relationship with my own impulse, I'm going to use that term, it's quite strong, then I have to figure out a different way, because I can't be in right relationship with you and not in right relationship with my own impulse. And this, of course, again, was something he struggled with, because he had these schools and he had these followers and he had the whole, you know, community. I can't remember if it was in Puerto Rico or Cuba, but then he left them, you know, because something in him was not cogent. It was out of balance. And to respect that also is you know, he's just very hard to package. He's not you can't pre-package him in a way. Yeah.
As you were speaking, I was thinking about the reason why we wanted to bring Ivan Illich in as a voice. You know, we want to amplify Ivan Illich's voice, is because of this kind of propagation, and because he would cut through many of the neologisms, you know, which get on my nerves, which seem so easy and so cool. And so, you know, he would just sort of cut through all that very, very intensely. So I think we need this kind of intense, urgent kind of like voice. And also I think that he was he called himself a salesman, kind of like in as a joke, but he was also nomadic. He went from place to place because he was always following the living impulse. I wouldn't say it's impulsive in a negative sense. I would say he had an intense intuition, or he was very much anticipating. He was very much in the moment, but also he was anticipating what was coming. It's interesting. I was thinking about how he talks about the present moment, but he's often considered a prophet, because of his ideas and system theories, that we're living in the age of systems, and his articulation of our time right now is so accurate, and he was so ahead of his time. Anyway, so I think that's this. I consider him to be a kind of prophetic voice, but he would not say that. He would say he would say that friendship matters, but again, not the sentimental version. So that's great that you're bringing that up.
Yeah, again, yeah, I would say he was prophetic, in the sense of his impact when you read him. But I think he considered himself mostly a historian. Like, he really felt that he could not predict the future, but to really understand the impact of the past, how it pervades into the present, and unchecked, it would just go on. Like, he really had this understanding. For example, he said that the modern European state was an extension of the Christians, of the Catholic structure coming out of the Roman Empire, and that he really thought a lot of the implications of the Western world was that it was founded on these fundamental structures of Roman/Catholic eschatology, the whole hierarchy and the different layers of the cardinals over the bishops and all this stuff. And so what was interesting to him is to understand that by the time you get into the 20th century, those structures are over determining what can happen, but they've faded. Nobody feels like they're under like the Catholic Church, in the nation state. But he's saying that they're persistent. And this gave him the ability not only to see, well, until people, like I call it malware, it goes very deep, until people can see the fundamental structure, then everything they do in the future will be constrained by something that they're just not aware of. And so this is why he could also make blanket statements about the medical institution and the educational institution and the financial institutions, that come in an inflection point in the history where they would no longer work. And so he could make these blanket statements, but of like, as long as you're pursuing medicine and the definitions of sickness in this same way, nothing, no technological fix, nothing you do will make it better. Because he saw that these very, very strong structures that come from the past were over determining everything that was possible, certainly in the present and going forward. So that's what I think makes him prophetic, is that he, in the course outline, it was like we had 1 foot in the 12th century and 1 foot in the 21st. And it's that he saw these structures that came out of the 12th century as being constraining what was possible in the 21st century. And he was interested in making people aware of the power of what they could not see.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, what I always find interesting, if we look at, the glasses of Protestantism and the way it still defines our work ethics and, our morals, even though we seem to have overcome all this. And even like Sloterdijk in his new book writes that we basically still live in the age of the dinosaurs, while kind of burning the forests that that were alive then, and using that as our fuel. So it's like we're always engulfed in these different time periods, and never quite the secular being that we ought to be.
Yeah, and one of the things I hope we talk about in the course is, in our community broadly defined as the liminal web, or what the hell, whatever we are, you know, there are these things like that.
Yeah. There's a glitch in the matrix all the time. Yeah.
There are these I'll get that thing down. It's interpreting my hand. Okay. So in our community, broadly defined, there are these initiatives like, you know, Jonathan Peugeot, Chris Master Pietro, John Vervaeke, to reestablish, you know, to take a new look at 12th century, let's say, structures. And then we have the same thing in the Buddhist community, you know, like there's a lot of interest, and, you know, there's Gaffney's cosmoerotic humanism is a going back into original Jewish lineages and remaking that somewhere. And so it's very interesting. I would love to have had him here. Maybe we could ask David Cayley about this, like what to think or what to make about these this move to revisit the structures, but also to rely on them. And so what Illich was certainly not a secular person. He was a deeply religious person, but he also, I would suspect, be very curious about this movement that we see.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when I was reading his biography and his early career, he didn't go into churches and talk to people. He mostly talked to secular people. He mostly talked to people outside of the churches, and he mostly lived outside of the church, I would say, in terms of after he had his sort of split with the Catholic Church. And he became a figure of the 60s and 70s. He became a kind of a revolutionary figure. And then he was canceled at a certain point. It's evident when you read his stuff, you know, that he was, you know, inspired by Christianity, but what he wouldn't directly talk about it in the early days. And in the later days, when he started to talk about Christianity in the 90s and stuff, that this was not fashionable, right? It just had, people were not interested in religion, it would seem, at that point in history. So, but now I think people are becoming more interested in religion and trying to go back and find what we quote unquote we've lost, you know, in religious liturgy and in religious activities. Because I think that if we don't have religious liturgy and activities, and you know, we're pretty empty. We're pretty. He would say that we become ciphers of some kind. We become very empty unless we're filling our spirit with. That's kind of my point of view, and it was with some kind of liturgical practice and some kind of relationship to religion. So, but at the same time, the paradox is he was always outside of the Catholic Church and being very critical of the Catholic Church. So I wonder if he's a semi-heretic as a figure.
My own opinion is that it's like a cart before the horse thing. So religions, so, you know, okay, this might be a story. I don't know if it's true, but the story is when the Europeans went to India, they were asking people like, what religion are you? But they didn't have a concept of religion. They just had their culture. And then those cultures became codified as religions relative to our perspective, right? But the thing is that religions emerge because people are religious people. And they have relationships with the world and each other that is inherently religious. We can talk about that. And then because they are establishing, like in the workshop, we're going to talk about trust relationships and domains of care. If you establish a society like that, eventually rituals and certain languages. You know, when you work with the same group of people over time, you have certain words that take on their own meanings that are exclusive to the community, and those become like religions. Like in the pop-up school, we have this thing, we go like, work less, see more. Okay, and it came out as a joke, but if you looked at us from outside, it'd be like, oh, that's a religion. You know, what does that mean? And so the problem we have as moderns, this religion without a religion, is we want to bypass being religious people. We just want to get to the structure that looks like a religion and that can scale, and then people can hang out. They can see, oh, it's a religion. It's got symbols. It's got this. I want to be a part of that. But this is a perversion, because they're not being religious people. They're just looking for a club that's like kind of a cool religion that has you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and the opposite is also true. They don't want to identify with anything whatsoever and just remain an individual. So I think there's those two extremes. There's either becoming part of a cult of some kind,
right,
you know, and joining the egregoric, if that's a word, you know, mentality of that particular cult, or just saying I can do it myself, and kind of the do-it-yourself spirituality.
Yeah, so the question is, what does it mean to be a religious person? Does it mean, like, what does that mean? And of course, for Illich, it was all the icon, the parable of the Good Samaritan encapsulated everything about being a religious person. And again, most people get it wrong, because they think the Good Samaritan is, oh, I take care of my neighbor or whatever. But the whole point of the Good Samaritan, you don't get it. If you're not disgusted by the person in the ditch first, you're just helping someone. You're helping someone that's like you. But E.E. Cummings wrote a great poem, and he said, it's about the stranger who fell among the thieves. It's a poem about, it's a Good Samaritan poem. And in the end, it says, from whom the stiffened puke. You know, like he's looking at the guy, he's got a heart on, he goes to look at him, and he's got stiffened puke, and he says, I picked him up all into my arms and carried him into a million, billion, trillion stars. And again, this is where Ivan Illichs is extremely serious. He's like, this Good Samaritan story does not work if you don't have your normal animal instinct to be disgusted. And yet, the religious impulse comes in. These two have to arise together. It's not about not having an animal impulse. It's how can they arise together? Yes, I'm disgusted. And yet, you see the difference? And this is the religious life. The story of Christ is extremely monstrous, extremely brutal.
Yeah. And
yet, so it's this and yet that is the religious attitude that gets bypassed. And not by everyone, but people who are not bypassing it tend not to be celebrities on the internet, for one thing. So can we talk about this and experience, and then that's what he would call, the conversation around, the serious conversation around these provocations would be the basis for a convivial society.
So just to understand, because what I know through, about Ivan Illichs is mostly by osmosis. So I've read some articles, but not that much as you too. So, but it seems to me as if, what you're talking about is more or less similar to the, polarity between esoteric and exoteric. And in order to live properly, you have to oscillate between these two things and align yourself. So that's one thing that's come up in my mind. And the other thing is that, sure, but that's true for, what you say, that these structures, these external structures kind of develop and then create a life on their own. That's a societal, cultural practice in itself. You find it everywhere, not only in religion. You find it in every discourse that you have, be it in Black Lives Matter or woke culture, everything, that these things got crystallized. and from then on create a discourse on their own.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, and it happens faster and faster now, right? The rapid adoption of a meme or a movement or something happens a lot, so there's some hope in that, because if you can crystallize meaning that changes people's behavior in the right direction, then you said Illich was a salesperson, and I think we are in some sense in the art of persuasion, right? In some sense. And so that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? If you can change people's behavior but they don't really in their core understand, they haven't changed their behavior because of a true religious impulse. Well, that's still good, right? That's still good. But it takes a true religious impulse to create.
What is that? What is a true religious impulse? Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, good. No, this thing, like he's saying, I'm disgusted, and yet I'm going to help the person, and I'm teaching at the school, and the church is getting political. It's out of line with my deepest impulse, so I'm going to move on. This sense of moral responsibility or voluntary obligation to some central North Star in oneself. These I would call religious.
So I have an example.
Can I just have a follow-up, Andrews? I'm so sorry. Sure. Can I have one follow-up question? So, because there's this idea that awe is like one of these core things where you access the sacred, and you might call the spiritual, but where does that align to what you're saying? Is that part of that, or?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm doing right now is kind of being very Ivan Illichs, right? So in a broader, Bonnitta Roy would talk more about awe and talk about different types of things, but I'm just trying to stick with or present more of a Illich thing. For him, the way I understand it, and so maybe this helps when I say deeply religious, he found awe in Christ, in Jesus Christ. The highest form of awe was his relationship with Jesus Christ. That's extremely religious in its just standard definition. I would more talk about nature, and I work a lot with animals and people in animals and nature. This was not necessarily his thing. But when you go in and you have a relationship with God, or for him, it was the New Testament and Jesus Christ. It was the awe in the story of the crucifixion. This is very religious, right? To have awe in the story of the crucifixion. Sometimes I've said the story of the crucifixion is a monstrous story. We make monstrous gods, right? But so that's what I'm calling the religious impulse is in this Illich sense. Does that make sense? I'm not advocating for it, or I'm just trying to.
Well, what I was thinking about is I know somebody's father who was dying recently, and all of his friends took off. Right, he was very sick, and they couldn't be around him. And the only people that stuck around were a bunch of old rabbis because they'd been contemplating death for many years and living a religious life. So I guess being fundamentally religious, whether you're Christian or Jewish or whatever, means that we have to face the monstrous, we have to face the horror, and we have to face this apocalypse. We have to face this, this what scares us the most, and in order to be there for the Samaritan or for whoever needs our care. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like I'm taking care of my mom, and she's quite feeble and has quite a lot of dementia. And you go in there in the morning, she's soiled herself. You have to clean up the poop. I mean, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. And then you watch the body and the mind, and and you wonder, like, it's fascinating in a way. I've watched a lot of animals die. She has no pain, and you don't watch animals die if they're in pain. But you have to come to terms with this. This is a body that's rotting in front of your face, and she's still alive. I mean, this is the truth, right? And then you wonder, like, what is it? I'm not especially sentimental. It's very hard on my sister, and so sometimes she gets actually angry because she gets overwhelmed with the grief, and then the anger comes. And to me, it's just life. It's just the back end, and I'm not overly sentimental. And I just do the work. I just go in and I do the work. And that's the best thing for her. I normalize everything and I do the work. I feed her, I clean her, I just do the work. And in that, there's some beauty, but it's not, I'm not going to find it out there, because out there it's disgusting, and for Illich, most people, I'm fortunate because my sister runs the cancer center, and she's worked on the elder care of many hospitals, and she can do blood work at my house, and she navigates the health system. This is extremely fortunate for my family, which is why we can manage my mom at home. But for most people, the mother would go into a nursing home, and then when you go into a nursing home, it's just all these nurses running around, and and it's too chaotic to experience something that is shouldn't be a cloud over the human condition. It's core to the human condition, So Illich would say all these hospitals and all these systems, it robs individuals of the opportunity to experience this part of the human condition, which is important.
Well, he would say the art of dying, we've lost the art of dying, so to speak, in a culture. Hospitals sort of dispense with that as an art.
And they, I can tell my sister, because she's a nurse, she gets angry because my mom doesn't make progress. And I'm like, there is no progress.
Yeah.
She's dying.
Yeah.
And then it'll come up, the impulse will come up in her. And again, this is an impulse that is honored, and we don't fight about it, to try to fix it. And it's not something that, it's a feature, not a bug, right? That people die. And so, yeah. And so again, these, like you said, the dying, and then the rabbis, the impulse, how can the impulse meet this aspect? Because otherwise, without that religious impulse or something, you can't meet it. Like you said, then most of the family just stays away.
Yeah. Yeah, what always resonates with me is this kind of Jungian notion that, in order to reach to the heaven, you have to reach down to hell. And the more you are able to do that, the more you are able to, confront yourself with, the circles of hell and everything, the more you are able to reach beyond and find the other in a kind of sense. And that's always fascinating to me, because it's also like a kind of measurement how one can take, and because suffering is obviously painful, but enlightenment is also pretty painful actually, and so you have to contend with these things in a proper way.
Yeah. Maybe we could get back to your course, and if we're thinking in terms of what Tom was asking me, okay, conviviality. What is it? People, why would people take the course? What will the course give them, and what is the essence of this course that you're going to be doing about conviviality, about the convivial life?
Well, I think there's two aspects. One is I'm pretty confident that the way the course is set up, will promote dialogue, conversations in the live sessions, and certainly in the campfire, that people will remember for a long time. I think that, I mean, I've been doing this work for a long time, and the kind of conversation that will or can arise will be deeper and will create insight. I mean, we're trying to do some collective insight practices behind the scenes here. So I think that's really important. And then on the third session, there's an actual workshop where you do exercises that get you in touch with your ability to trust and your trust style, and really reveals something about, you can talk about trust all day, but when you do the exercise, it will reflect something that might surprise you about yourself and how you spend your time. So it will actually put you kind of where the rubber meets the road in terms of who am I in society, not like is society bad, but like who am I, and then how can I work from what is actually the case. This is how I trust, and I don't trust this way, and I trust Amazon, but I don't trust my neighbor. Like, why is that? And so part of the course is like the skill building that happens behind the scene. In terms of content, there's tremendous, like on the one on education, there's a tremendous amount of surprise in the content. Like the one on education, we're going to work with many voices, but we're going to look at an economist who studied higher education for a long time because he couldn't understand why people spent more and more money on education when they didn't get any skills. They're not better employees. So but the employers want them to go to school, and on and on and on. And it's a fascinating story about different people trying to understand from an economics why education flourishes in late stage capitalism. And most people know this as the human capital theory of education. And we're going to find that that doesn't go far enough. And so this itself is a very interesting learning. We're going to talk a lot about systems, and because most of us are systems thinkers, but we're going to look at why systems thinking is really not the right direction, and how do you think outside of systems in a world that's as complex as ours. And that's an interesting conversation. We're going to talk about AI in the tools section. We're going to talk about AI and Chat GPT, and what that looks like. And in the last one, we're going to talk about this notion as the religious impulse, the Good Samaritan, and this notion of God. What did Illich said? God didn't become man; he became enfleshed. And this notion of religion as something to do extremely intimate with the body, the enfleshment, right? That in he talked about God as carnality, and I think that being good modern or postmodern Christians, we bypass that a lot in terms of when we think of religiosity. We think it's up there where we look for God, and not in the flesh, not in the animal nature. And how can we integrate this? And I would argue that because God is not enfleshed in our modern sensibility is why we destroy the planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a couple of thoughts I had. I wanted to go back to this idea of systems, because I remember David Cayley did a series where he says it's not an ecosystem. We talk about it as being a system, but there's no such thing as an ecosystem because it's too complex, and it can never be systematized, and life can never be fully systematize, and there's so much hubris in our notions of trying to create a system. And then it's very interesting how the religious impulse always goes up, and always goes into escapism and goes into the celestial or the divine or something up there. And I think, and even in medieval, times, they built these huge cathedrals going up, and we built skyscrapers going up, and this downward movement back into the body seems very interesting to me. So
Alexander Bard is being channeled here. The whole phallus thing, I can hear him. But I like to say, hi, Alex. So it's like what Tom said. I say, okay, religion has a vertical dimension, but saying vertical meaning up is like saying horizontal means to the left.
Great,
right?
Yeah.
And so Tom is saying, no, the vertical dimension is this whole thing, hell up to heaven.
Yeah.
And so, there's, and of course, the thing that's provocative about enfleshment is not because we want to say vertical is only down, but it's been the part that's completely bypassed. And it's like I talk about, I'm someone who's extremely skeptical of any kind of notion of original sin. And, I grew up Catholic, and I remember the priest saying, you're not a sinner because you sin. You sin because you're a sinner. Like, you're just born a sinner, right? And Buddhism has the same thing. You're born human, right? This is a problem. You came back. You're born again. It's already like some kind of like.
It's a problem. It's a problem situation.
It's a problem situation.
Yeah.
And I think this, so for me, that's another thing that has to be purged from, And the systems thing, if an ecology is not a system, then what is it? I mean, Latour said the same thing. It doesn't matter if you call it a machine, the earth a machine, Gaia, or a giant vegetable. When you start relating to it as if it's an object, you're actually just relating to a mental object in your mind. You're not actually relating to the earth. So this is in the systems part of the course. So then the question is that we will look at, then how do you relate to things? Like, how do you relate? Is it helpful to call something a hyperobject? No, because you can't relate to it. You've paralyzed yourself. Versus we want to parallax ourselves. We want to be able to take a different kind of view of what is without going into systems thinking. How is that possible? This is a interesting question.
Yeah, if I may, because I also wanted to ask about systems, because the question is what kind of systems theory you're talking about in a kind of sense. Because you have obviously this kind of objective, I'm not part of the system, you have systemic psychotherapy, you have constructivism and systems theory in itself, you have even meta models that are highly systematic and very limited by that kind of approach, although I find them still useful at some point. But you see the limits and boundaries very clear. Whereas when you compare it to Gebser and the work of Jeremy Johnson, it's way more open, it's way more interactive in a kind of sense. So again, but what kind of systems are you talking about? Systems in general? The systems thinking in general? Can you specify that maybe a little bit?
Yeah. So to make it easy, seeing things as systems is what I call a cognitive stance. You say, okay, let's agree to go into this language game and see if it's useful. So to see things in systems, then I have some kind of mental model that structures it, what's inside the system, what's outside the system. And then I have certain ways to be in my mental construct relative to that system. So I can I can think I can operate on the system. So you get like people that want to micromanage nature as if they're outside of nature. Sometimes I think, oh, I'm in the system, it's shaping me, like Marshall McLuhan, right? That would be the mental model language game you could enter. Or you could enter a third way, which is I'm not either in the system or outside the system. I can call it a system because I know at some level everything's related. But what if I poke and see what poking around reveals about the environment? So that's much more open. And so I stopped talking about the system, but I kind of am aware that things are related. And the only thing I can do is poke and then see what happens. And because I'm a learning creature, there's some learning that will happen. But then if I try to systematize that learning, again, I'm no longer working with the system. I'm trying to operate on a mental model of it. So basically, we have to see that it's optional what cognitive stance we take on what is. We could take a cognitive stance that it's not a system, it's the breath of God. And then I'll start to see reality as the breath of God, and we could actually make meaning about that, especially if we were like taking psychedelics, right? But the point is to understand that there are no systems in nature, but nature can make itself available to be useful. But then we get into systems thinking, and everybody thinks, okay, there's more and more reality by just getting more and more complex systems without understanding that it has its own constraint. The problem with systems thinking is that the language game presents itself as if it can see the whole system. And yeah. Was that a good answer? It was kind of complex, but it's a complex question. Yeah.
Well, that brings up to me. I'm sorry to jump in so quickly. A lot of people today are talking about quote unquote meta crisis, and they're looking for solutions to the meta crisis, and that requires a certain kind of systematic thinking. Well, these are the problems. We have to do this and this and this. And one of Illich's main ideas, I think, was counterproductivity. So I often wonder if a lot of what people are reaching for in their systematic thinking, because they might have this perfect system, but if they're leaving something out, that thing they left out might destroy the whole thing, like sort of like one brick that's in the wrong place, or so we have to, maybe it's just like, how do we become flexible enough to let's say, and what about all this talk about the meta crisis and the meaning crisis, and how do we become flexible enough with our intellect and to do the Tai Chi necessary to live a life, right? Was my question clear, or?
Well, I'm not sure what the question is. I mean, is it just like, well, an open-ended question, or?
Now, can we have a meaning crisis if we stop looking for systems?
Okay, so first of all, I don't think we have a meaning crisis. It's kind of like the boy who cried because he couldn't feel his feelings. Like if you feel like there's a meaning crisis, then there's something that means something to you.
Right.
Right. So just collapse and be with that. Like that's a falsehood. Like if you feel like you have a meaning crisis, you get the analogy. The boy is crying because he can't feel his feelings, right? But
you still have meaning in that moment. That's the paradox.
Exactly. And so to me, that's where, like, dive right there. Like for me, that's the discussion that I have with people when we go there. And then they discover, they think there's a meaning crisis out there because they can't face, they can't face the pain of how the grief of what is being robbed and taken away from them.
But that's true meaning.
That's true meaning, but that's what I'm saying. We don't have a meaning crisis. We have people who can't deal with the profound meaning that the world is pushing on us. And so that's a whole fucked up thing. Like that whole, it's like, and of course it gets traction because it allows that energy of the pain to now start thinking about the meaning crisis. But the other part of the world is we look out at the world and things are not great. See, he agrees. Things are not great. Yeah. He says
there's monsters at the gate.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I respond to, this is now Bonnie. I mean, this is kind of this is updating Illich. I'm trying to be Illich in the meaning, not the meaning crisis, in this fucked up world, that things are not great. And they don't look like they're going in the right direction. And everything Illich said about the medical all these things, the education, they're not great. And they seem to be getting worse. So this is meaningful for us. We want to do something about it. And and I think that's your question. So and I lost my thought. And so how do we proceed? And one of the things that we need to, like this course, this is one way to proceed, because there's a lot of bullshit on the table. And if counterproductive. Yeah, there's a lot of bullshit on the table. And if we see that the world is not great and we want to do something and we pick up a bullshit tool, like the meaning crisis, then there's an inversion. Then everything we do is only going to make it worse. And so a lot of what the first step is to figure out what tools are just not helpful. And even if that means you don't do anything, at least you're better than you were. Okay. So that's one thing. So
the meaning crisis is a counterproductive tool in your view.
Iatrogenic. It makes people think there's no meaning. This is impossible. I mean, there are some psychological conditions where, I've worked with people with allothemia. They think they can't feel their feelings. They get into ennui. But most often they come and do horse workshops, and then they 2 weeks later, they're crying and they're like all upset. What is this? And I'm like, that's, be careful what you wish for. Now you're feeling your feelings. How does it feel? Horrible. Okay. That's why you didn't want to feel your feelings. And the other thing is, there's 42% of young people have allothemia, and something, I don't know how to pronounce it, but because they're looking for their feelings in their head. Okay, they're looking for their feelings in their head. And then they realize, feelings have something to do with your body. Why do kids look for feelings in their head? Because the education system is fucked up. And as soon as something happens in your body, the adults now say, use your words. Okay. And so kids, you see, they go like this, and then they have a language instinct. So they learn what the socially acceptable word is for this situation. But they never realize it's supposed to point to something that's happening in their body, because their parents don't think those words. This is what I call malware. Like the educational system is creating people who think they can't feel their feelings. And so the first step is to get rid of the malware, systems thinking. Tools that are not at scale to the human condition. This is if you pick up a tool, then and so this is very abstract. Let me bring it home. So we have bears, and bears are scary, and they come here, and because I feed the birds, and they like to get into the birds, and every once in a while I have this conversation with my husband, we should really get a gun, because what if they were what if this? And then we say no, because if we get a gun, living out in the woods without a gun is different than living in the woods with a gun in your house. It changes the whole thing, because it's easier to get the gun than to learn about the bears. And so this is one of the things, is what are the tools? And so a gun is a physical tool, but these mental constructs that we've always relied on are not useful anymore. And it does no good just to make them more and more complex. So systems thinking, then meta systems thinking, then meta. And so this is one step. And then the second step is to, how do I become an agent in the world? So there's this meaning crisis, but there's also people no longer believe that their actions have consequences that matter. This is a real crisis. This is actually, people don't believe that they can take action that has consequences that matter. How do we reclaim that? That's a big step, right? So, I mean, we're having the kind of campfire conversation that we want to have. Like,
but that would, I mean, I'm just to defend John. That would be the meaning crisis. Is this nihilism of feeling that your actions have no consequences? The fact that that is so widespread. But like, I understand what you're saying. There is that, but often that is just a projection of people who you know are afraid of their own of their own meaning, of the fact that they're going to die, and experience pain and all these things.
But Andrew, wasn't that always the case, that people are afraid of death? I think
that's the perennial thing. But then there's certain aspects of this culture which are sort of pathological. I guess that would be what they would call the meaning crisis. But
I think the interesting point here is that we were talking about this kind of exoteric, crystallized structures that we set up through systems thinking and treat them as if they're true, and completely forgetting that we made them up in the first place, right? And thereby creating meaning. But I like that very much, to open that up a little bit, and to ask, okay, is there really a meta crisis that is different from, well, let's say 50 years ago or 100 years ago, where the world was lying in pieces and nobody know if somebody drops a nuke or something,
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to add one thing, and then I remember when we were in Maple, me and Bonnie were in Vermont at a Zen monastery, and there was a lot of young kids around, young guys. They had a very young monastic group. And if you talk to every one of them and they ask them, why are you here? Why are you here at this Zen monastery? And I've been to Zen monasteries. When I was a young person, I went to a Zen monastery. And my reason was, I'm fucked up and I want to get my shit together, by meditating and becoming a better person and, kind of all that. Their reason was, I think the world's going to end and we have to do something to save the world. And I thought that was kind of strange. I thought that was very odd. I mean, I know there's a way in which that is true, but the fact that means that the meaning crisis has become an ideology of some kind, and that people their motivation is to fix that. So maybe there's something problematic in that.
Yeah, so there's something beautiful in them, and then there's something perverted. And I'm going to tell kind of the same story, because I said to this same thing. Well, why are you here? And this one man was he was horrified by the impact that humans have on the world. Okay, fine, I get that. But that's also up for examination. And he wanted to stay in the monastery until he could figure out how to fix the world, like you said. But inside, I could tell he had this original sin. And so I pointed to the robin and I said, see that robin there? Do you think it has to justify its life? And then he got it. Like, he was trying to like, how can I owe a debt by the fact that I exist. I already owe a debt. And this debt has, so I'm not saying that human behavior shouldn't be fixed, but I'm saying that to take young people and have them, the religious impulse be to justify their very existence versus like the opposite. I mean, I get up in the morning, I have energy, I see flowers, I talk to fun guys like you. There's an internet, like through it's all given. It's all given to me for free. The earth and the life process is giving me all of this for free. Like I lay down at night on the bed, it's not a great bed, and I'm like, wow, like I lay on a bed and it's all easy. And can we, and I like that's the fucking thing. Like we're surrounded by riches, like, and so if you put that in people, then the expression in the world will be to be more like that, not to justify this. It'll just come out naturally that they want that beauty will unfold from them because they received so much they receive so much benefit through no effort of their own. The body does all this stuff. It's and so this is to me the reversal. And then the only other thing to put in there is to figure out, I call it voluntary obligations or vows, to figure out what's axiomatic to you. Like what's axiomatic to me is I would like to, as much as I can, get people to see the possibility of restoring more nature in the environment instead of ruining it. Like to me, that's axiomatic to my work. I can't justify it. Everything's in so what's axiomatic to Soryu up there is the preservation of life on Earth. So you could say he has contradictions and you don't like the way he's doing it, but at least you know what his bottom line is. He thinks that life on Earth is in danger.
Well, there's a difference if it's based on original sin and based on a feeling of poverty and lack and I suck and the world sucks and everything sucks.
Yeah.
If that's your motivation, then you're kind of like you're kind of, you know, rather than Chogyam Trungpa once said that like the original sin was the worst idea that it was ever created because it makes people feel terrible about existence itself, and they should be replaced by the original goodness, like not in the sense of good versus evil, but in the sense of this color red is fantastic, you know. And if we could approach life that way with all its horrors at the same time, then that would be better. And that also, that I'm also tying that into the corruption of Christianity in a sense, somehow, which was Illich's idea as being a Christian who saw that the corruption of Christianity was the simulacrum of all of these, all of these sort of views of let's say the conceptual apparatuses that we build around ourselves to justify something, whereas the reality is much more immediate and direct.
Exactly. And I think once you get over that, then you start to see if all of that is given to me freely by nature or God, it's a kind of a miracle. You see that there is possibility for action that has meaningful consequences, because life is a kind of what I call magic reality. We don't know how it happens, but reality happens, and it's kind of like magic. And so you don't know how you're going to have a meaningful effect, but if you're a transformed individual and eventually you see something's happening in a small way, But this is what actually how the causal reality, the causal manifold of the universe works like this, not by telling people they have to justify their existence, so fix it. It's the remarkable reality of being alive through no effort of your own has great power. And we take it for granted, you know. That's the thing.
Very nice, and nice to end on that note of magic, which is kind of a theme here at Parallax.
Yeah, I know.
You haven't noticed. Yeah. Well, anyway, great talking, Bonnie, and I'm really looking forward to this course. I think it's going to be great. I think everybody should sign up for it. I'm absolutely certain, because I've seen you work a little bit. You know that it's not going to be just an ordinary course. That some real shit's going to happen there. So, thanks a lot.
Thank you. I finally made it to the Tom and Andy show.
Great, yeah. Well, it's been long overdue. Yeah.